This is my theory as to why we can't stop categorizing ourselves. There's a lyric in one of Sabrina Carpenter's newer songs from her latest album, and the song is called Man's Best Friend, and the lyric goes, "He wanted all four of my personalities." Now, the lyrics, like all her lyrics, are praised for being cheeky and relatable, a wink at the chaos of modern dating, sure, but I think those lyrics are not so forgettable because when you think about it, it kind of points a painful mirror reflecting the way so many of us think about ourselves. Fragmented, broken, confusing, and not one person, but many. Again, to most it's just a clever line, forgettable, but to me it brings this idea up of something deeper, which is, what is it that makes any one individual personality four? And why are we so obsessed with categorizing ourselves anyway? You see, the idea of having multiple personalities has become a sort of shorthand for essentially being human. A legitimate mental disorder turned colloquial phrase, now used to express ordinary changes in things like our mood, our desires, our outfit choices. Many people joke about having one self for work, another for friends, another self for families or your social media personas, and yet another self buried somewhere beneath it all, our so-called real or authentic self. And I have found that we tend to categorize ourselves to such a high degree for this esteemed sake of knowing ourselves, so much so that when we even so much as slightly deviate, what was that? Okay, there's 3 candles on, I don't want to start a fire. That when we so much as deviate from these self-proclaimed self-identifiers, we kind of panic. There are 1,000,001 ways to categorize yourself. Are you a movie person or a book person? Are you a summer or an autumn kind of person? What's your style? What's your Enneagram? What's your MBTI? Your Big Five score? What is your deal? What is your deal? And some of these are very fun to participate in. And maybe somebody is so singularly defined as to being a summer or autumn person. But I feel like this categorization pain can stress people out sometimes, to the point where we joke and label any sort of conflicting attribute about ourselves as an alternate personality, instead of calling it what it truly is, which is our full, all-encompassing, and often contradictory selves. But why do we insist on simplifying ourselves in this way? Why can't we accept that these alternate identities are all stemming from one soul, one being, and ultimately, unless clinically diagnosed, one personality? I mean, it's like we know this, but we don't know this. We know logically that this is all coming from us, but we don't really believe that sometimes. Hence the decision to kind of call things our alternate personalities. Perhaps this craving to understand ourselves and everybody around us is in part primal, part for survival. However, one thing is for sure, the desire to sort ourselves into perfect, neat little categories and to find exactly who we are has always walked hand in hand with the terrifying realization that maybe we can't. And so back to my theory. Is it a theory or a hypothesis? I know there's a difference between those two words, but listen to this video and tell me if this is a theory or a hypothesis. Anyway, my theory, for lack of a better word, to explain this identity obsession, that damn phone. Hear me out, hear me out. I know that sounds oversimplified, and I tend to demonize the phone and the technology and the social media on this channel, I know, but we are all aware at this point that the modern world consumes a lot of media. I shouldn't have to cite a source to prove this very painful fact. It feels believable on its own. Globally, people aged 16 to 64 spend over 6 hours a day on a screen consuming some form of media. Now, it's important to note that most everything successful or popular in media has a clear message behind it. One brand, one image, something that sells, that grabs people's attention. When we watch something, we want it to fit a certain expectation. We want to feel a certain way. When you clicked on this video, you vaguely knew what you're getting yourself into. If you're still here at this point, well, you wouldn't be here if you weren't in the mood for a thoughtful conversation or a mild existential crisis. If this sort of talk wasn't appealing to you right now, wasn't hitting your expectations to some degree, if this wasn't appealing to your current state of modality in some way, you would have clicked off by now. We want to know what we're getting ourselves into when we're consuming a piece of media, at least to some degree. Likewise, we see perfectly curated Instagram pages, neatly packaged YouTube channels, or TV characters written so well that everything they do makes perfect sense for their story arc, at least. And we want that for ourselves. We want so desperately to make sense. We want to be dependable, reliable, and easily understood. We want to be seen. Everything we consume has a point, an angle, a clear identity. In turn, we see these perfect depictions of aesthetics and personal styles, public personas, and personal brands that we get overwhelmed by modalities. There are just too many ways. There are just simply too many ways of being, too many ways of thinking, too many causes to get behind. How do you pick? Too many things that we allow ourselves to consume and be involved with because we like many of them, but we also feel pressured to commit to just a few or even one and hone in on it, right? For the sake of our identity, for the sake of success in this world. We wonder what fits us best, what kind of friends it might bring, what it might say about us, what vibe it gives off, and whether it makes sense in our own minds or in the minds of others. We want to know that we are who we really say we are. We don't like dealing with any sort of cognitive dissonance. And this brings up the idea of the trap of code switching. Perhaps this is why we tend to admire people who don't engage in what is often called code switching. Now, code switching is the practice of changing how you present yourself depending on the environment. How you speak, what you say, or even what you wear. What I think is emotional intelligence and reading the room, is kind of code switching. It's why we may act differently around work friends versus online friends or family friends, and it's a natural tendency for most. But I think we as people wrongly conflate code switching with a lack of integrity. We see those who behave the same all the time as people who are true to themselves, not changing for anyone or anything, and we admire them because they operate almost more like characters in a movie as opposed to actual human beings. You see, characters always act how they are written, no matter the situation. And I think we sometimes shrink ourselves to mimic this predictability for the sake of our own sanity. You see, in media, this dynamic makes characters all the more engaging. Because for better or for worse, the audience can depend on them to act in all sorts of predictable ways. We admire that because in media, it all tends to work out in the end anyway. And if it doesn't, that inconsistency in the character's decision serves the story in a grander way. I think because of all this media that we consume and this premise almost of demonizing code switching and admiring our characters despite their flaws. We almost kind of wish to act the same 24/7. We ignore our own seasons of life, our moods, our education, or our shifting experiences, because we just kind of want everything to all make sense like a perfect storybook or movie or show. We try to pick one state of modality we feel pressured to, so we have something to refer to as our true self and something to strive for, to stick to as best as we can. And for some people, this is dying on the hill of your Harry Potter house. For others, this is committing to an aesthetic of all black clothing, even if a particular color is calling to you that day. We limit ourselves from certain experiences if we have this idea in our head that that's not who we are, that's not what we do, that's not what we wear, we can't do that. But the thing is, we are not perfectly written characters in a super clean, lovely story wrapped up in a bow. Life does not always have to be perfect. It's never perfect. Life does not always have a perfect, well thought out story arc, unfortunately. We have conflicting interests. We have contradictory aspects of ourselves that don't always seem to fit neatly together, and none of this resembles the perfectly wrapped packages of media that we consume all day long in various forms. Perhaps that's why we cannot accept our own variance as one grand personality. We are wired, maybe even conditioned, to see patterns, to choose a way of life, to pick a limiting community or worldview or personal style. And the second we deviate, we confuse ourselves, we confuse others, and we ultimately let ourselves feel lost. And now for a philosophical detour. Lucky for us, philosophers and great thinkers have felt lost way before we have, forever. I don't know, since the beginning of time, or whatever point in history where they had to stop worrying about like survival and just like existential crises. Yeah, a long time. These lovely folks have collectively wrestled with identities for centuries, if not millennia. Though I don't think the code has been entirely cracked. Plato, our boy Plato, believed our true selves were not part of this physical world, but belonged to a realm of perfect immaterial forms. René Descartes, sorry René, this person stripped it down to one undeniable truth: I think, therefore I am. Thinking, doubting, questioning was his only stable ground of existence. Friedrich Nietzsche, how do you say this man's name? Friedrich Nietzsche dismantled the idea of having a fixed identity, arguing instead that we are made of competing drives and masks, endlessly shifting. Carl Jung introduced the idea of the persona, the self we show the world, and the shadow, the parts we hide, suggesting we are never just one thing and often don't ever know ourselves fully. Simone de Beauvoir and Judith Butler took it one step further, framing identity not as something we are, but instead as something we do. Now, these are all great thinkers and concepts, but I think Eckhart Tolle, who offers my favorite take on the identity crisis, presents a striking take in his book, A New Earth. You see, for Tolle, most cries of authenticity are simply expressions of your ego. And the ego is this socially conditioned mind that constructs narratives of identity. Being real in this sense often only means defending opinions or clinging to a personal history or asserting dominance through differentiating yourselves from other identity groups. Us versus them. This is how the ego is. But to Tolle, any ego-based identity is an illusion, matrix-like in its deception. The self that insists on being authentic is precisely what obstructs deeper presence. True freedom, he suggests, comes from awakening to consciousness itself. From this perspective, authenticity is not about expressing a fixed essence or aligning with one identifying modality of being, but rather about transcending our ego's need to define and defend identity at all. In this sense, authenticity, as culture defines it, is not just a lie, it's an addiction, a strange compulsion to cling to an identity in the first place. Both historical philosophical critique and Toll's spiritual insight align on this point. The real self is a mirage, whether constructed by your surroundings or fabricated by your ego. It all tends to be a big fat lie, essentially. Now, recognizing this does not condemn us to sadness, nihilistic thoughts. Instead, it invites us to embrace a post-authentic ethic, one that acknowledges identity as fluid, relational, and performed, while staying open to the awareness behind our ego. This is a lot. This is making sense. It's a lot for me. It's hard to explain. You should just read his book. It's like, it's like that. But he basically refuses authenticity, because authenticity is this trait that is often worshipped. And by refusing this authenticity, by accepting that, it's still performative, by admitting it is still very performative and affected by lots of different factors, it almost paradoxically is the most liberating. It's a gesture we can make against our urge to constantly want to categorize ourselves. And that, my friends, is what I feel like is the solution to stop freaking out over who we are. I really resonated with Toll's take on the personal identity crisis. That's what I think it is. It's not what he refers it to, but that's how I see it. But practically, how do we combat this? Okay, cool. So let go of your ego. Recognize everything's a big lie. But how do we do this practically? For that, I propose another truth-telling piece of media wisdom. Never let them know your next move. Jokes, memes, vines. Remember vines going around where just silly guy doing something stupid? He'll be walking down the hallway. He's like, don't let them know your next move. And then he does parkour off the wall. Because you can't let them know what you're going to do next. This is the concept here. Okay, keep following. We are complex, imperfect beings who consume bite-sized, perfectly packaged media all day long. We scroll through curated Instagram grids, Pinterest pages with perfect outfits, or movie characters who always make for a perfect story. And in this world of branding, aesthetics, niches, and PR, we've forgotten what a beautiful thing it is to be unidentifiable. Because when we are unidentifiable, we are unmarketable, at least to the masses of capitalistic consumption, which rules life. Because no matter how polished and put together examples we see, our lives and personalities are not perfectly understandable pieces of media. No, they're not. We are not meant to be so easily consumed. We are not something that needs to be perfectly understood in order to be bought, in order to be loved. We have aspects of ourselves that don't appear to match. That may make it harder for others to understand us, unless they truly know us deeply. But that complexity is amiable, because we are not a product to be sold. So the next time you catch yourself questioning what personality you're going to be putting on for any given moment, pause. Instead, question what parts of your being are you refusing to let coexist at the same time? And who is making you choose anyway? You, the world, this identity that you feel like you have or should be. Maybe when we overcome the need to label exactly who and what it is we are, we can finally understand what it means to just be. How's that for food for thought? I'm gonna go to bed now. Good night, everybody.